Well, among the 100 philanthropists, the average donation was around $8 million. Nearly a third came from construction and real estate sectors. And they gave most often to educational causes and least often to environmental ones. Well, for more on China's emerging role in philanthropy, I spoke to Edward A. Cunningham. He's the director of Harvard's Kennedy School and their Ash Center's China's program. And I began by asking him why the educational field is in pole position for those charitable funds.
It's interesting. It's really a confluence of several factors. On the one hand, I think that many philanthropists tend to look back upon their lives and think through the impact of education and largely the positive impact of education, the ways in which education opened doors and opportunities for them. So I think first it's a personal story. Second is interesting as well because it really relates to more community and really the more collective approach, which is that education is really viewed often as an investment that has significant positive externalities to society. So it's not just an individual story about how education touched them, but also a story of how an educated population can help China itself, right? So it can help China build a knowledge-based economy, increase innovation, increase value-added activities along the global production network. So I think it's a mix of personal but also larger national goals that come together in the form of a philanthropist.
And you mentioned, obviously, uplifting the community and also the focus on education. Are there any other unique approaches that China has that makes the way it approaches philanthropy different?
You tend to see very different patterns in China than you do, for example, in the United States, where in the U.S. majority of giving is individual-based. In China, it's largely through corporations. So what you end up seeing is corporate giving directly from corporations, direct donations through corporate foundations, many to government institutions. And so I think the biggest difference is really still a lack of trust in the sector.
Now, you mentioned a lack of trust, and China has updated its policy when it comes to how it regulates philanthropic activity. How do you see that shaping the way that Chinese people give?
Yes, so I think that fundamentally, because of those challenges, what we end up seeing is there's a localism in giving, right? So you end up seeing, for example, if you look at our most recent report and the sort of top 100 donor work and most generous, China's most generous website that we just launched, it's quite clear that basically over 70% of the giving happens right within the provincial unit of the donor, the headquarters of the donor's company themselves, right? So there's a localism in giving. That reflects both certain amount of instrumentality that exists, I think, with any philanthropy, where you're trying to build your local social political capital, right? The closer you give, the closer the impact and the benefits. But on the other hand, what's also quite interesting is that localism is largely driven towards government-affiliated institutions, and again, directly from the individual through their corporation. And so that reflects that the lack of trust in the current and often few still independent, transparent recipient organizations and that a typical philanthropist would give to.
Obviously, we've seen a growing Chinese middle class. How has that shaped the way that Chinese people give?
So people have asked that question many times. You start to see the impact in terms of really two ways. One is as the middle class itself begins to diversify its interests because of that new wealth, you're starting to see the diversification of those interests reflected in the diversification of giving. So one thing we saw that was quite interesting was really the vast majority of the top 100 donors we saw were really single cause donors, right? Education. A much smaller percentage, really around 20%, had two causes, and then 7% three, and only one, really Jack Ma, had four causes. So what we're seeing over time, though, is increasing diversification away from a single cause to multiple cause giving. So that's one. And then second, I think in terms of the middle class, they're also quite interested in linking their giving both domestically but also internationally. And so I think over time what we'll end up seeing, because of the middle class and their own internationalization, is the globalization of their giving and the linkages between Chinese givers and recipients outside.